American flags out there. Bodies in the house says, what crimes are grounds for disarmament under normal circumstances? Yeah, well, yeah, I would say a lot. I mean, like an aggravated DUI where you kill something, or manslaughter or something like that. Any real felonies, you're going to be any felony, you're going to be in big trouble with. In Georgia, they still have laws on the books against adultery and fornication. If Fanny belonged to most churches like mine, they'd ask her to leave, given her repeated sexual behavior outside the church, and welcome her back if she was repentant. Great comment, Bonnie. Yeah, and I'm Catholic. I go to church when I need to. I'm not a very good Catholic, I would say, like according to Catholic probably traditions. My mom and my family is like they're in church every Sunday.
I'm feeling a lot better.
When I need to.
Not quite 100%, but I'm feeling much better. Thank you.
For Fanny to almost be like endorsed, it felt like kind of an endorsement. Like
giving work another try.
Speaking to the congregation, like it was an invitation. Like we're endorsing you from the wagons, we're supporting you. And I was thinking to myself, there was kind of a lot of, sin in was there.
Oh yeah. She's still home. She's going to go in tomorrow. She wants to take one more day on the couch. Yeah, she got the same thing I had.
Someone who was in many people's eyes, and probably God's, not on the right side of this whole thing, to be then exploiting religion for her own personal.
Just reading things. Russell. It's InfoWars. I thought Russell Brand was already broadcasting. Weird. It's already live. Right. We'll wait for him to go live. We'll pop up.
Completely separate and distinct. They were like, Trump's guy did it. He was working with like Russians or something. Remember? They're going to do it again in 2024. You understand what I'm saying? They're going to have to tie that story to Trump. How are they going to do it? All you got to do is listen to Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi, this is Hat Tip Maze Moore, by the way, another great follow on Twitter. Here's what you're going to see. You're going to see, for those of you listening on Apple and Spotify and on audio platforms only, you're going to hear Nancy Pelosi in 2016, I believe 2018, and then now. You're going to hear three separate cuts. It's going to sound continual. You're going to see how she moves from collusion to more Russian nonsense to now, and then I'll play the cut individually. She's claiming now that, the Russians may have something financial on Trump. They're already doing it. Here, play that cut.
We will, of course, retain the White House with the election of Hillary Clinton. I have worn my white and purple colors of the suffragettes in honor of the fact that we have our first woman president, soon to be Hillary Clinton elected president. What do the Russians have on Donald Trump? Politically, financially,
welcome.
and personally. What does Vladimir Putin have on President Trump? personally, politically, financially, in every way. What does he have on Donald Trump? I think it's probably financial. I think it's probably financial. Either something financially has on or something on the come.
Folks, I'm going to play that clip individually, the last one, because the thing about Democrats is you got to understand they know the media will not scrutinize anything they say at all. So you may be saying in the chat right now, you probably are thinking, I mean, they're not that stupid to give up the whole story this early, right? No, they are. It's not that they're stupid, it's that they know the media will go along with anything they say. Nancy Pelosi has sent out Joe. I wish I could whistle like that.
Hey, Jared.
The dog whistle. Hey, start reporting stories about Russian financial connections to Donald Trump. The fact that they're totally made up is completely irrelevant. They're already telling you what the collusion is going to be. Financial collusion. The Russians are paying off Donald Trump. Trump's got some business interest in Russia. Watch. That is going to... Joe, can you flag it for me? 11:40.
I gotta give this truck some space. It's fucking sand in the back and it's just flying off into my car.
Please flag that because you're going to see it in the coming weeks. It's going to be some derivative of something like, let me just guess because the Democrats predict Donald Trump wants Russia to take over eastern portions of Ukraine and hold Crimea because he's got some economic interest in some property or something. Folks, you got the flags? We got flags. Yes, flags are in the chat. You heard it here first. It's not gonna. It doesn't matter that it's bullshit. It doesn't matter. The media will not scrutinize anything. Just here we go. Here we go. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that it's reported before the election. Here is the slightly longer, only about 20 seconds, but this is the actual cut and a complete thought of Pelosi telling Jen Psaki what the collusion scam is going to be going forward.
He looks like he's going to be a person without dollars either, but the values are what concern us.
Yes, the dollars are.
I don't know what he has on him, but I think it's probably financial. I think it's probably financial. Either something financially has on or something on the come.
It's not stupid, okay? It's not stupid. Well, Nancy Pelosi is not stupid, okay? She's not. Nancy Pelosi is evil. She's malicious. She's engaged in so much political malfeasance. I could do an entire week of shows on it, okay? But it would actually, in the end, it would get boring because she's been up to so much no good for so long. Do you think Nancy Pelosi said that by accident? Nancy Pelosi already has the talking point. The media, Jen Psaki, the New York Times and the Washington Post, Philip Bump, Natasha Bertrand, Ken Delaney, and all the hoaxers out there.
How you got no money, man?
All the CNN crew, they now have their marching orders, which is tie Donald Trump financially to Putin and claim somehow anything he does or says on Ukraine or anything is going to be Trump trying to make money off it, therefore we shouldn't like him. And if the Russians don't want him in and this fake source over to make up the story about
I'm going that way.
I'm glad you all flagged it, because when it happens, you're going to be like, good, I'm not wasting my time on this show. What have we been wrong about? Seriously, what have we been wrong about? This is not hard, man. This doesn't take any real investigative skills. These people are stupid. They're telegraphing it right now. But the takeaway before I move on to the interview.
All right, I'll be right back. Listen to Dan. Hopefully Russell will be on by the time I get back.
Folks, please, I'm asking you as a friend. I've been doing this a long time.
All right, I'll be right back.
Doing criminal investigations. Working with intel people for a really long time. I'm asking you as a friend. Anytime you see our FBI, DOJ, say someone associated with Russian intelligence did something to hurt the Bidens or to help Donald Trump, I base level assume without any information countering that person is not Russian intelligence or is working with the United States. It's insane, I have to tell you. But if I didn't have evidence to back it up with the Kalimnik Manafort case that they've done this exact thing before, I promise I wouldn't say. All right, Donald Trump gave an interview last night. Chancellors, I need your input here. Bacino, let me do a little poll. My humble opinion, Granted, I'm not completely objective on this matter, so I understand that. I endorsed Donald Trump early, so I get it. But I'm trying to be objective. My humble opinion, I think it was Donald Trump's best hour. I thought some of his best answers, I thought best revenge will be success, was probably the line he should use and put on every bumper sticker all around the country. My humble opinion, that should be his tagline for the rest of the campaign. My best revenge was success. It was an amazing line. Yes, you think it was his best interview, and no, you thought he did better in another one. I think it was his best hour long. I mean, some of the answers were maybe not his best ever, but I thought in total, yesterday I thought was his best performance yesterday. Yeah, it was really good. Looked presidential, didn't get distracted, and gave really tight answers. I hope he sticks to that. I want you to watch this because this is what set the media into a tizzy last night. Here was the answer that, of course, set the entire left-wing media on fire when he talked about mail-in ballots. Check this out.
Speaking of that, how are you going to make sure that mail-in ballots and voter fraud, which we heard from a lot of people in line, was an issue front and center? They're very concerned about mail-in voting. So forget the past. What are you going to do to make sure we don't have problems going forward?
If you have mail-in voting, you automatically have fraud. If you have,
okay, well, there's mail-in voting in Florida, and you want news.
If you have it, you're going to have fraud because you don't have any. When you go into a voting place, like you go into one in a properly run state, they look at you, you give voter ID, you give all sorts of identification. I mean, it would be very hard to cheat in a mass scale. When you send out millions, like California, I think they sent out 36 million ballots. They don't have a voting booth in the whole place. And then millions of ballots come back. Nobody knows where they're coming from.
Right, but what are you going to do about it?
The way you win is by swamping them. The way you win is by swamping them. You got to have, and we're going to swamp. I'll tell you what, I did great in the first election. I did much better in the second.
Folks, whenever Donald Trump brings up the fairly obvious about mail-in ballots, that if I don't have to go to an election official to sign in, show ID, and vote, obviously it's easier to cheat. Does anyone in the chat disagree with that? Is it? But the fact that that's remotely controversial with leftists shows you how malicious these people are, because they know it's not controversial. They're just lying to you because they want to cheat. Of course, if you want to cheat, you'll object to people saying common sense things like Trump just said. What Trump just said makes absolute common sense to anyone who has a dendrite and an axon functioning. Anyone. If I can just drop a mystery ballot in a mailbox without having to see anyone, of course I'm more likely, it's easier for me to cheat than have to walk in and show ID. This isn't hard. Of course, everyone in the media freaked out. But what Donald Trump said has already been reported by the New York Times. Do we got to do this again? Tony's like, you said it, but don't blame me. Tony, really? You put this in the show again? Come on, man. We're working together. Come on, I'm already tired of this guy. He's like, come on, me, bro. You told me to put ID. Here we go. Adam Liptak, 2012, New York Times, error in fraud, mail-in ballot. You can look up the article yourself. The New York Times reporting on mail-in fraud. Mr. Sancho, who's become a legend in the show, Mr. Sancho said the more people you force to vote by mail, the more invalid ballots you'll generate. New York Times, 10 plus years ago. Yet Donald Trump says it, and it's a big...
in the way that they did last time, because they changed the rules in quiet last time before the election, because people were not looking for it to that degree.
Right.
People are now. There's value in that, so use that as a tool. And I would say prepare for the election. Do everything you can with your local representatives, and of course everything you can on the platforms where you're allowed to speak out about this, so that you raise public awareness, because even people who don't want to acknowledge it, if the shenanigans are so blatant and enough people are looking for it, it's just like COVID. Think about this with COVID. This is what happened with COVID. I have never seen in my lifetime, I would be willing to bet, since World War II, I have never seen more people convert than in COVID. Why? And this is where people go, oh, you're just talking. First off, that's not what we do. We do a lot here because of your support with the month. We hope that we serve you adequately, and that's why we have to investigate more shows, because we also need an alternative. There is value in that, but there also is value in hitting critical mass societally, where people are aware of the shenanigans that are going on. And with COVID, that's what it took. It may not be the first chamber that has millions of plays. It may not be this show that has 1.2 million people or 3 million people. It may not be one election stream, but cumulatively you had, just with this, you support the month, hundreds of millions of plays throughout that debacle. And then you add hundreds of millions from other creators and very articulate commentators out there. And there were enough people who, they were liberal. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've met who said, yeah, I was, and then COVID happened, and I started looking into it a little bit more, and then I was affected directly. Their workplace or their child. A lot of parents where they saw what happened with their children, and all of a sudden COVID forced parents to look into teachers' unions. That was the ripple effect. It forced parents to look into, well, what's the pupil spending here? I just thought it was a school that didn't get any funding. It forced people to look in into the kind of company that they worked for. It forced people to look into social distancing. The CDC, the WHO, what is this? They're not acknowledging Taiwan. I can't tell you how many people were awakened during COVID, and that can happen if there are enough eyeballs on it going into an election. I think that the soil here has been tilled. I do think at this point it's been fertilized and it's ready for people to go, okay, there have been so much talk about election interference. Look, it's not gonna, are they pulling that shit again? It's a very different mindset.
Absolutely. And there are alternatives now with Rumble, right? I remember in 2020, I mean, we were basically just hoping not to get a strike so that we could, would have to miss the election live streaming coverage. Now, it didn't make us pull our punches necessarily, but we were more cautious with kind of a dump button or something like that. But the other thing is the Google manipulation. Right. And we sat down and talked with Dr. Robert Epstein. Go follow him online right now, because he actually posts, I think either it's daily or he has a website that tracks it daily, these tens of thousands of data points, hundreds of thousands of data points where Google is actively swinging elections, just simply by reminding people in Democrat-heavy districts to vote and not reminding Republicans to vote. And changing search, that is the next frontier of trying to do this without you seeing it. Right. They can't do the other stuff.
And change one data point. Because here's the thing, it doesn't require all platforms. It just requires one. In the last election, we didn't have one. Rumble was not where it is. Elon Musk did not have any control over X. Change one. Oh, Facebook, YouTube, Spot, they're all going to get rid of the Hunter Biden. We know that would have changed the election.
100%.
We 100% know that would have changed the election from every single study, and by the way, poll of Biden voters conducted. Elon Musk was in charge of Twitter back then. Guess what? It gets out. They ban it. Everyone goes to X. Everyone goes to X. That story gets out. The election is different. So now you have at least one X. You've got two, X and Rumble. And the test there was, and this is why we really ask that all of you watch on Rumble as we do the election stream. We're going to mirror it to YouTube if we can. It was the biggest, a midterm, it was the biggest election stream that night, and it wasn't even on YouTube. Now, that's not every day, because YouTube has a huge leg up. Of course, they benefit from Section 230. But the market share with Rumble is increasing as far as media consumption, and then as far as social media, X. That's two major changes, and it only takes one. So I actually... I'm not saying that any of this is a guarantee you need to do your legwork, but I do like our chances in cutting through the fog on that. I really do. I think it's a very different landscape. Final chat.
Final chat from Ray 1776. Question: if people have lost trust in the Red Cross and no longer want to donate, who would you suggest they donate to?
Well, I was just asking if Mission Control can find a place. We should do some digging. Let's find it and come back tomorrow. If there is a place that exists where you can donate blood, that provides that information to people receiving blood, if it's vaccinated or unvaccinated. Because if that's the case, I'm going to change my practices in donating blood. I just go to a place that's more convenient. And it's decidedly inconvenient. They call me 5 times a month. Like, here's this blood type. I don't want to give it to you because I don't want to be ready for murder. But they say,
I'm not sure that's how it works.
less than X% of the population. It's one of the most rare blood type there is. It could be the most rare. This is where I'm not telling you the full truth because I don't want you to guess. So
They guilt you.
they call me all the time, and they finally go, all right, okay, I'll come in and donate blood. They go, okay, well, if you go through our portal, I'm like, just no, make it seamless. You called me.
Yeah.
You called me. Don't let me go through a portal and you don't need a questionnaire. I've done it like 50 times with you guys. You called me. You know what? Send a truck. Come pick up my bags of blood. You're going to make me go through an hour-long questionnaire and sit in a waiting room when you called me 5 times this month to give. I'm literally giving you my life essence for free. And all I'm asking is that you use the exact same questionnaire that I have filled out at least 40 times. And that's the problem with bureaucracy. Someone could be dying who needs my blood type, but I have to go in so that you can have me fill out a questionnaire and tell me about your assortment of Nutter Butters to refuel after. And by the way, it is one of life's simple pleasures. I've never had Nutter Butters in the house. I don't eat them. Every time I donate blood, the little sliver of pleasure that I get to enjoy is the Nutter Butter sleeve. And I'm happy about it.
Butters?
They got Nutter Butters.
I didn't know. I want to stop burying my blood in the backyard.
Yeah.
It's an old school method.
Yes. Well, you and the horse guy. I wouldn't say that was voluntary. So, if there's a place out there where it is convenient for you to give blood and they will separate vaccinated and unvaccinated, we will let you know because we always want you to support companies who share your values. And if it doesn't exist, that is a business opportunity. And I mean that. I don't know if we have the capital. Maybe we'll do a drive for that. We'll do a mud club drive so then we can create a blood drive. I'm serious. I've changed my mind where I just go in and I donate blood and I have no idea. I have no idea where my blood goes. It could go to OJ's beach house.
Or a liberal.
Migrants.
I have no idea.
Migrant criminals in prison.
Well, I don't care if they get vaccinated blood. I would say give them the double vaccine platelets.
The Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah, give them the Johnson & Johnson. Well, it doesn't need to be refrigerated though. I mean, you'll die. So, the moral to the story is, if you call me 5 times a month and then ask me to fill out a questionnaire, you better stock up on Nutter Butters because I am coming for all of it. We'll see you tomorrow.
Neither does NATO or the United States, and it doesn't have the people. Russia has 100 million more in population than Ukraine does. That means that further support from the West for the Ukrainian military only means more dead Ukrainians in a further degraded Western economy in the U.S. and in Germany particularly. So it's not simply a fool's errand, it's self-destruction. It's insane, it's cruel, it's abetting the killing of an entire generation of Ukrainians. This is very obvious.
Jody, Midwest, what's up, guys?
And yet somehow the United States Senate, which is always several years behind reality and its perception, just a few weeks ago, decided to send another $60 billion to the Ukrainian government, which is both corrupt and authoritarian. They've canceled elections, they banned an entire Christian denomination, and then they killed an American journalist for noting any of this. And yet, the United States Senate...
Yeah, I feel a lot better. I just sound like shit.
...to send another $60 billion to
I'm going to work, so that's a good thing, I guess.
Wake up this morning and discover
I'm earning
what actually happened. And so with that in mind, we thought we were talking to one of the very few Republican senators who's bothered to make a counter case. That would be J.D. Vance from Ohio, who joins us now from the United States. Senator, thanks so much for coming on. If you wouldn't mind telling us where this legislation is right now, what you expect to happen, and what you think should happen.
Yeah, Tucker, so there are two big things that will happen here. So tonight we will clear a major procedural vote or we won't. So this is really the best opportunity tonight to kill this legislation. I urge everybody to do everything that they can and contact everyone they can to ensure that we actually do kill the legislation. It is very close. The Democrats have banded together with 17 Republicans. We only need 8 of those Republicans to flip their vote to kill this. And I think that we'll get at least one who will in fact flip their vote. So that's where it sits in the Senate. The second thing, and frankly the best opportunity we have to kill this, is in the House. And that's part of what I'm trying to do, is notify people about how bad this legislation is, so that after it clears the Senate, if it does, then it goes to the House, and the House has a real opportunity to at least make it better, but hopefully kill it. Now, I want to say just a couple of things here, Tucker, that are extremely important to know about this legislation. Number one is that it sends $61 billion to Ukraine to fund, as you said, a hopeless war in Eastern Europe, and decimate the Ukrainian population even more than it's already been decimated. So it's a terrible, terrible piece of legislation on the policy. The second thing I want to say, Tucker, though, is that it doesn't just fund Ukraine in 2024. And this is the most important point. It actually funds Ukraine in 25 and 26. Now, what's the problem with that? Say, for example, that we have a new president in 2025. That president would be handcuffed by the promises that we are making in law to Ukraine today. If you go back to 2019, Tucker, to try to give you a sense of why this matters. In 2019, the U.S. House impeached then President Donald Trump on the theory that they had appropriated money to Ukraine, and Donald Trump refused to send it to Ukraine. So if Trump is elected president again and become president on January of 2025, he will conduct diplomacy. And if that diplomacy does not include sending additional billions to Ukraine, there is a theoretical argument, a predicate, if you will, for impeaching Donald Trump because they have tried to tie his hands. And the final point I'll make on this, Tucker, is that the Washington Post has already said, based on leaks from inside the intel community, the purpose of this legislation is to tie a future President Trump's hands. We're not just sending billions to Ukraine in 2024. We're trying to make it impossible for the next president to conduct diplomacy on his terms. It's anti-democratic, and it will lead to endless war all over the world.
So the political calculation behind this seems incredibly dark. So does the humanitarian effect. I noticed that no one on Capitol Hill seems interested in finding out how many have died in this war. Reliable estimates in the area, these are not partisan, are that about 400,000 Ukrainians died. That's about as many Americans as died in the entire Second World War over the entire duration. So we're so much smaller country. So how do senators, Republican senators, get away with saying we're doing this on behalf of Ukrainian people, on behalf of democracy, but it's destroying an entire generation and it's not a democracy? What's the thinking?
Well, Tucker, they bought into the propaganda that what is in the best interest of Ukraine is to prolong this war. So Zelensky comes to Washington. He's tougher than a lot of them are, and I think they get a little bit of excitement from that. And Zelensky tells them a story that his war is in the best interest of the whole of Ukraine. Now, never mind that there are people within Ukraine protesting the draft. Never mind that the average age of a soldier there is pushing 45 years old, and never mind that the 650,000 wealthiest Ukrainians left the country at the beginning of the war. They didn't stay and fight. So the idea that this is unanimously supported by the Ukrainian population is, of course, preposterous and absurd. No one believes it. But here's the really crazy, and I think ultimately the very cynical thing that's going on, Tucker, is that everyone knows that this war will lead to the destruction of Ukraine. I've had conversations with Democratic colleagues where they get this sort of dark look in their eyes, and they say effectively that they want to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian drop of blood. I think if you really ask these guys, they recognize that this is not in the best interest of Ukraine. This is fundamentally in the interests of military contractors and people who think that America's most pressing challenge is to defeat the Russians. Of course, that's not a preoccupation that I share. I don't think Russia should have invaded, Tucker, but I also think that we got to be much more focused on more pressing problems like the demographic collapse of the United States, like the open borders, and like what's going on in East Asia. So it's a massive campaign, Tucker, to distract people from the real problems in the world and the real problems that exist in this country.
And underlying it all, as you just said, is an impulse that's a defensive. So I'm so grateful for you having the courage to talk about this in public, and I hope common sense and position prevails. Senator J.D. Vance.
Oh, nice, Avatar. Oh, Jesus. No, let's just get in front of
Free
Doc and hit
speech
our
is bigger
brakes.
than any one person or any one organization. Societies are defined by what they will.
Yeah, let's just get in front of
Mike Benz is, we can say with some confidence, the expert in the world on how this happens. Mike Benz had the cyber portfolio of this department. He's now executive director of the Foundation for Freedom of Online. We're going to have a conversation with him about a very specific kind of censorship. By the way, we can't recommend strongly enough. If you want to know how this happens, Mike Benz, B-E-N-Z, is the man to read. But today we just want to talk about a specific kind of censorship, and that censorship that emanates from the fabled military-industrial complex, from our defense industry, the foreign policy establishment in Washington. It's significant now because we're on the cusp of a global war.
What do you want me to do? You want me to just not do anything for now?
And so with that, here is Mike Benz, Executive Director of Foundation for Freedom of Online. Mike, thanks so much.
I was actually going to check on that today.
And I just can't overstate to our audience how exhaustive and comprehensive your knowledge is on this topic. It's almost unbelievable. And so if you could just walk us through how the foreign policy establishment and defense contractors, DOD, and just the whole cluster, the constellation of defense-related funded institutions.
Okay, I will.
Strip from us our freedoms.
Sure.
I'm probably not going to be able to afford whatever they're charging for the body cams, but at least I'll find out how much.
Freedom. And it switched from internet freedom to internet censorship.
I mean, they haven't even sent me a report yet.
I
got your report from you, but
almost from the
none of the police reports.
Of the privatization of the internet in 1991, we quickly discovered through the efforts of the Defense Department, the State Department, and our intelligence services that people were using the internet to congregate on blogs and forums, and free speech was championed more than anybody by the Pentagon, the State Department, and our sort of CIA cutout NGO blob architecture as a way to support dissident groups around the world in order to help them overthrow authoritarian governments as they were sort of billed. Essentially, the internet free speech allowed instant regime change operations to be able to facilitate the foreign policy establishment's State Department agenda. Google is a great example of this. Google began as a DARPA grant by Larry Page and Sergey Brin when they were Stanford PhDs, and they got their funding as part of a joint CIA-NSA program.
Ridiculous
to chart how birds of a feather flock together online through search engine aggregation. And then 1 year later, they launched Google and then became a military contractor quickly. And thereafter, they got Google Maps by purchasing of CIA satellite software, essentially. And the ability to track, to use free speech on the internet as a way to circumvent state control over media, in places like Central Asia or all around the world, was seen as a way to be able to do what used to be done out of CIA houses or out of embassies or consulates in a way that was totally turbocharged. And all of the internet free speech technology was initially created by our national security state. VPNs, virtual private networks, to hide your IP address. Tor, the dark web, to be able to buy and sell goods anonymously. End-to-end encrypted chats. All of these things were created initially as DARPA projects or as joint CIA-NSA projects to be able to help intelligence-backed groups to overthrow governments that were causing a problem to the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, the Obama administration. And this plan worked magically from about 1991 until about 2014, when there began to be an about-face on internet freedom and its utility. And the high watermark of the sort of internet free speech moment was the Arab Spring in 2011, 2012, when you had this one by one, all of the adversary governments of the Obama administration, Egypt, Tunisia, all began to be toppled in Facebook revolutions and Twitter revolutions. And you had the State Department working very closely with the social media companies to be able to keep social media online during those periods. There was a famous phone call from Google's Jared Cohen to Twitter to not do their scheduled maintenance so that so that the preferred opposition group in Iran would be able to use Twitter to win that election. So free speech was an instrument of statecraft from the national security state to begin with. All of that architecture, all the NGOs, the relationships between the tech companies and the national security state have been long established for freedom. In 2014, after the coup in Ukraine, there was an unexpected counter-coup where Crimea and the Donbass broke away. And they broke away with essentially a military backstop that NATO was highly unprepared for at the time. They had one last Hail Mary chance, which was the Crimea annexation vote in 2014. And when the hearts and minds of the people of Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation, that was the last straw for the concept of free speech on the internet in the eyes of NATO. As they saw it, the fundamental nature of the war changed at that point. And NATO at that point declared something that they first called the Gerasimov Doctrine, which is named after this Russian military general who they claimed made a speech that the fundamental nature of war has changed. You don't need to win military skirmishes to take over Central and Eastern Europe. All you need to do is control the media and the social media ecosystem, because that's what controls elections. And if you simply get the right administration into power, they control the military. So it's infinitely cheaper than conducting a military war to simply conduct an organized political influence operation over social media.
Electric equinox.
Industry had been created that spanned the Pentagon, the British Ministry of Defense, and Brussels into a organized political warfare outfit, essentially infrastructure that was created, initially stationed in Germany and in Central and Eastern Europe, to create psychological buffer zones, basically to create the ability to have the military work with the social media companies to censor Russian propaganda or to censor domestic right-wing populist groups in Europe who were rising in political power at the time because of the migrant crisis. So you had the systematic targeting by our State Department, by our IC, by the Pentagon, of groups like Germany's AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland there, and for groups in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Now, when Brexit happened in 2016, that was this crisis moment where suddenly they didn't have to worry just about Central and Eastern Europe anymore. It was coming westward, this idea of Russian control over hearts and minds. And so that was Brexit was due in 2016. The very next month at the Warsaw Conference, NATO formally amended its charter to expressly commit to hybrid warfare as this new NATO capacity. So they went from, basically 70 years of tanks to this explicit capacity building for censoring tweets if they were deemed to be Russian proxies. And again, it's not just Russian propaganda. These were now Brexit groups, or groups like Matteo Salvini in Italy, or in Greece, or in Germany, or in Spain with the Vox Party. And now at the time, NATO was publishing white papers saying that the biggest threat NATO faces is not actually a military invasion from Russia. It's losing domestic elections across Europe to all these right-wing populist groups who, because they were mostly working-class movements, campaigning on cheap Russian energy at a time when the U.S. was pressuring this energy diversification policy. And so they made the argument, after Brexit, now the entire rules-based international order would collapse unless the military took control of the media. Because Brexit would give rise to Frexit in France with Marine Le Pen, to Spexit in Spain with the Vox Party, to Italexit in Italy, to Grexit in Germany, to Grexit in Greece. The EU would come apart, so NATO would be killed without a single bullet being fired. And then not only that, now that NATO's gone, now there's no enforcement arm for the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, or the World Bank. So now the financial stakeholders who depend on the battering ram of the national security state would basically be helpless against governments around the world. So from their perspective, if the military did not begin to censor the internet, all of the democratic institutions and infrastructure that gave rise to the modern world after World War II would collapse. So you can imagine
may I ask you to pause
later, Donald Trump won the 2016 election.
So you just told a remarkable story that I've never heard anybody explain as lucidly and crisply as you just did. But did anyone at NATO or anyone at the State Department pause for a moment and say, wait a second, we just identified our new enemy as democracy within our own countries? I think that's what you're saying. They feared that the people, the citizens of their own countries, would get their way, and they went to war against that.
Yes. Now, there's a rich history of this dating back to the Cold War. The Cold War in Europe was essentially a similar struggle for hearts and minds of people, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, in these sort of Soviet buffer zones. And starting in 1948, the national security state was really established then. You had the 1947 Act, which established the Central Intelligence Agency. You had this new world order that had been created with all these international institutions. And you had the 1948 UN Declaration on Human Rights, which forbid the territorial acquisition by military force. So you can no longer run a traditional military occupation government in the way that we could in 1898, for example, in the Philippines. Everything had to be done through a sort of political legitimization process, whereby there's some ratification from the hearts and minds of people within the country. Now, often that involves simply puppet politicians who are groomed as emerging leaders by our State Department. But the battle for hearts and minds had been something that we had been giving ourselves a long moral license leash, if you will, since 1948. One of the godfathers of the CIA, George Kennan, 12 days after we rigged the Italian election in 1948, by stuffing ballot boxes and working with the mob, published a memo called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare, where he said, it's a mean old world out there. We at the CIA just rigged the Italian election. We had to do it because if the communists won, maybe there'd never be another election in Italy again. So, but it's really effective, guys. We need a Department of Dirty Tricks to be able to do this around the world. And it's essentially a new social contract we're constructing with the American people, because this is not the way we've conducted diplomacy before. But we are now forbidden from using the War Department. In 1948, they also renamed the War Department to the Defense Department. So again, as part of this diplomatic onslaught for political control, rather than it looking like it's overt military control. But essentially what ended up happening there is we created this foreign domestic firewall, we say. That we have a Department of Dirty Tricks to be able to rig elections, to be able to control media, to be able to meddle in the internal affairs of every other plot of dirt in the country. But this sort of sacred dirt in which the American homeland sits, they are not allowed to operate there. The State Department, the Defense Department, the CIA are all expressly forbidden from operating on U.S. soil. Of course, this is so far from the case, it's not even funny, but that's because of the number of laundering tricks that they've developed over 70 years of doing this. But essentially, there was no moral quandary at first with respect to the creation of the censorship industry when it started out in Germany and in Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and in Sweden and Finland. There began to be a more diplomatic debate about it after Brexit, and then it became full throttle when Trump was elected. And what little resistance there was washed over by the rise and saturation of Russiagate, which basically allowed them to not have to deal with the moral ambiguities of censoring your own people. Because if Trump was a Russian asset, you no longer really had a traditional free speech issue. It was a security issue. It was only after Russiagate died in July 2019, when Robert Mueller basically choked on the stand for 3 hours and revealed he had absolutely nothing after 2.5 years of investigation, that the foreign to domestic switcheroo took place, where they took all of this censorship architecture spanning DHS, the FBI, the CIA, the DOD, DOJ, and then the thousands of government-funded NGO and private sector mercenary firms were all basically transited from a foreign predicate, a Russian disinformation predicate, to a democracy predicate, by saying that disinformation is not just a threat when it comes from the Russians, it's actually an intrinsic threat to democracy itself. And so by that, they were able to launder the entire democracy promotion regime change toolkit just in time for the 2020 election.
It's almost beyond belief that this is happening. I mean, my own father worked for the U.S. government in this business, in the information war against the Soviet Union, and was a big part of that. And the idea that any of those tools would be turned against American citizens by the U.S. government was, I want to think, was absolutely unthinkable in, say, 1988. And you're saying that it's there really hasn't been anyone who's raised objections, and it's absolutely turned inward to manipulate and rig our own elections, as we would in, say, Latvia?
Yeah, well, as soon as the democracy predicate is established, you have this professional class of professional change artists and operators. That is, the same people who argued that, we need to bring democracy to Yugoslavia to get, and that's the predicate for getting rid of, Milosevic or any other country around the world where we basically overthrow governments in order to preserve democracy. Well, if the democracy threat is homegrown now, then that becomes, then simply these people all have new jobs moving on the U.S. side, and I can go through a billion examples of that. One thing on what you just mentioned, which is that, from their perspective, they just weren't ready for the internet. 2016 was really the first time that social media had reached such maturity that it began to eclipse legacy media. I mean, this was a long time coming. I think folks saw this building from 2006 through 2016. Internet 1.0 didn't even have social media. From 1991 to 2004, there was no social media at all. In 2004, Facebook came out. 2005, Twitter. 2006, YouTube. 2007, the smartphone. And so, and in that initial period of social media, nobody was getting subscriberships at the level where they actually competed with legacy news media. But over the course of being, so
drop that hammer.
In the US, even though they may have been loud in moments, they never reached 30 million followers. They never reached a billion impressions a year type thing. As a uncensored, mature ecosystem allowed citizen journalists and independent voices to be able to outcompete legacy news media. This induced a massive crisis both in our military and in our State Department and intelligence services. I need a great example of this. In 2019, at a meeting of the German Marshall Fund, which is an institution that goes back to the U.S. Basically, I don't want to say bribe, but essentially the economic soft power projection in Europe as part of the reconstruction of European governments after World War II, to be able to essentially pay them with Marshall Fund dollars, and then in return they basically were under our thumb in terms of how they reconstructed. But the German Marshall Fund held a meeting in 2019. They held 1 million of these, frankly, but where a 4-star general got up on the panel and said that what happens. He posed the question: what happens to the U.S. military? What happens to the national security state when the New York Times is reduced to a medium-sized Facebook page? And he posed this thought experiment as an example of we've had these gatekeepers, we've had these bumper cars on democracy in the form of a century-old relationship with legacy media institutions. I mean, our mainstream media is not in any shape or form, even from its outset, independent from the national security state, from the State Department. You had the initial, all of the initial broadcast news companies, NBC, ABC, and CBS, were all created by Office of War Information veterans from the War Department's effort in World War II. You had these Operation Mockingbird relationships from the 1950s to the 1970s. Those continued through the use of the National Endowment for Democracy and the privatization of intelligence capacities in the 1980s under Reagan. There's all sorts of CIA reading room memos you can read even on CIA.gov about those continued media relations throughout the 1990s. And so you always had this backdoor relationship between the Washington Post, the New York Times, and all of the major broadcast media corporations. By the way, Rupert Murdoch and Fox are part of this as well. Rupert Murdoch was actually part of the National Endowment for Democracy coalition in 1983 when it was formed as a way to do CIA operations in an above-board way after the Democrats were so ticked off at the CIA for manipulating movements in the 1970s. But essentially, there was no CIA intermediary to random citizen journalist accounts. There was no Pentagon backstop. You couldn't get a story killed. You couldn't have this favors for favors relationship. You couldn't promise access to some random person with 700,000 followers who's got an opinion on Syrian gas. And so this induced, and this was not a problem for the initial period of social media from 2006 to 2014, because there were never dissident groups that were big enough to be able to have a mature enough ecosystem on their own. And all of the victories on social media had gone in the way of where the money was, which was from the State Department and the Defense Department and the intelligence services. But then as that maturity happened, you now had this situation after the 2016 election where they said, okay, now the entire international order might come undone. 70 years of unified foreign policy from Truman until Trump are now about to be broken. And we need the same analog control systems we had to be able to put bumper cars on bad stories or bad political movements through legacy media relationships and contacts. We now need to establish and consolidate within the social media companies. And the initial predicate for that was Russiagate, but then after Russiagate died and they used a simple democracy promotion predicate, then it gave rise to this multi-billion-dollar censorship industry that joins together the military-industrial complex, the government, the private sector, civil society organizations, and then this vast cobweb of media allies and professional fact-checker groups that serve as this sort of sentinel class that surveys every word on the internet.
So, can you give us, and thank you again for this almost unbelievable explanation of why this is happening. Can you give us an example of how it happens? How, just pick one among, I know, countless examples of how the national security state lies to the population, censors the truth in real life.
Yeah, so we have this State Department outfit called the Global Engagement Center, which was created by a guy named Rick Stengel, who described himself as Obama's propagandist in chief. He was the Undersecretary for Public Affairs, which is essentially the liaison office role between the State Department and the mainstream media. So this is basically the exact nexus where government talking points about war or about diplomacy or statecraft get synchronized with mainstream media. So
and may I add something to that? As someone, I know Rick Stengel, he was at one point a journalist, and Rick Stengel has made public arguments against the First Amendment and against free speech. And
he wrote a whole book on it. And he published an op-ed in 2019. He wrote a whole book on it, and he made the argument that we just went over here, that essentially the Constitution was not prepared for the internet, and we need to get rid of the First Amendment accordingly. And he described himself as a free speech absolutist when he was the managing editor of Time magazine, and even when he was in the State Department under Obama, he started something called the Global Engagement Center, which was the first government censorship operation within the federal government, but it was foreign-facing, so it was okay. Now, at the time, they used the homegrown ISIS predicate threat for this. And so it was very hard to argue against the idea of the State Department having this formal coordination partnership with every major tech platform in the U.S., because at the time there were these ISIS attacks and we were told that ISIS was recruiting on Twitter and Facebook. And so the Global Engagement was established essentially to be a State Department entanglement with the social media companies to basically put bumper cars on their ability to platform accounts. And one of the things they did is they created a new technology, which is it's called natural language processing. It is a artificial intelligence, machine learning ability to create meaning out of words in order to map everything that everyone says on the internet and create this vast topography of how communities are organized online, who the major influencers are, what they're talking about, what narratives are emerging or trending, and to be able to create this sort of network graph in order to know who to target and how information moves through an ecosystem. And so they began plotting the language, the prefixes, the suffixes, the popular terms, the slogans that ISIS folks were talking about on Twitter. When Trump won the election in 2016, everyone who worked at the State Department was expecting these promotions to the White House National Security Council under Hillary Clinton, who I should remind viewers, was also Secretary of State under Obama, actually ran the State Department. But these folks were all expecting promotions on November 8th, 2016, and were unceremoniously put out of jobs by a guy who was a 20-to-1 underdog, according to the New York Times, the day of the election. And when that happened, these State Department folks took their special set of skills, coercing governments for sanctions. And the State Department led the effort to sanction Russia over the Crimea annexation in 2014. These State Department diplomats did an international roadshow to pressure European governments to pass censorship laws to censor the right-wing populist groups in Europe, and as a boomerang impact, censor populist groups who were affiliated.
All right. Yeah, I do too. Yeah, I'm probably not going to be able to do a desktop. I might do one from the plant tonight. But I got some catching up work to do. I did a little bit from home yesterday, but I mostly chilled. Once again, congrats to Midwest on getting his case dismissed, or on his case being dismissed. Love you guys. I will see you later. I'll probably be in Bow's chat. Peace.